Wedding bells did not sound like freedom. They sounded like a verdict. Maya Whitfield stood at the back of the church with her hands wrapped so tightly around a bouquet of white ranunculus that the stems had started to bruise beneath her palms. Her glasses had slipped down her nose from the heat of 200 bodies packed into pews, and she did not push them back up. She was watching the aisles stretch out in front of her like a runway toward a cliff. Her uncle, Harold Whitfield, stood beside her in a suit that fit too well for a man who had spent the last 8 months bleeding the family dry through gambling debts he refused to name out loud. He did not look at her. He looked at the man waiting at the altar the way a man looks at a debt that has finally, mercifully, been paid. The man at the altar was Jun Ho Kong. Maya had heard the name whispered in rooms she was not supposed to be in. She had heard it said with the particular hush reserved for men who did not raise their voices because they had never needed to. The Kong family controlled the ports on the west side of the city, 3 restaurants that were fronts for things far less legal than kimchi, and, as of 11 days ago, the entirety of her uncle's remaining debt, which had been quietly transferred into a single document that required 1 signature and 1 bride. She had not chosen this. She had been informed of it, the way weather is informed to a person standing outside without an umbrella. Jun Ho did not turn as she approached. He stood with his hands loose at his sides, his black hair falling slightly over his forehead, a boutonniere pinned crooked against a suit that had clearly not been fitted with any interest in tradition. His shirt collar was open. Notier. It was the kind of detail that told her everything about how he viewed the next hour of his life. This was not a wedding to him. This was a transaction wearing white flowers. She reached the altar. He looked at her then, finally, and she felt the weight of his attention land on her like something physical. His eyes moved over her glasses, her plain hair pulled back too tightly, the dress that did nothing to flatter a body she had spent 20 years trying to make invisible. She watched something flicker behind his expression, quick and unreadable, gone before she could name it. "You're the niece," he said. Not a question. "Maya," she said. Her voice did not shake. She had practiced that in the mirror for 3 nights. Yun-hoo. He did not offer his hand. "This won't take long." It didn't. The officiant spoke words that meant nothing to either of them. Jun-ho repeated his vows in a flat voice, like a man reading terms and conditions he had already decided not to honor. When it was her turn, Maya said the words clearly, because whatever else was happening to her, she refused to let this room hear her voice break. When he was told he could kiss his bride, he leaned in, brushed his mouth against her cheek instead of her lips, and straightened before anyone could object. It was the first small mercy of the day. She did not know yet that it would be the last thing he did purely for her benefit. The reception was worse. It was held in a ballroom that belonged to the Kong family, all dark wood and low gold light, and Maya spent most of it standing near a wall while men in tailored suits studied her like an appraiser studies a painting they suspect is a forgery. She heard the word ugly twice, not whispered carefully enough. She heard someone say Jun-ho would have his real relationships elsewhere, that this marriage was paperwork, nothing more, and that the girl would understand her place soon enough. Jun-ho stood across the room the entire night, drink untouched in his hand, and did not come near her once. That was the moment everything changed, though she did not know it yet. Because a man walked in 20 minutes before the reception ended, a man she did not recognize, wearing a jacket that did not fit the room, and Maya watched Jun-ho's spine straighten a half-second before anyone else in the ballroom noticed anything was wrong. She did not know the details of what came next. She only knew that Jun-ho set his glass down without a sound, said something low to the man beside him, and crossed the room toward the exit in 4 strides that carried more violence in them than any raised voice could have. 2 of his men followed. The music did not stop. Most of the guests did not notice at all. Maya noticed. Maya always noticed everything. It was the one skill nobody in her family had ever valued, the quiet cataloging of details other people missed, and it was the reason she had spent 4 years buried in library science texts and code documentation instead of trying to be seen. She noticed the stranger's hand had been resting near his jacket's inner pocket. She noticed that the 2 men who followed Jun-ho did not look afraid. They looked ready. She found out 3 hours later, back in the house that was now apparently hers as much as it was his, that the stranger had been sent by the Choi family to deliver a message disguised as a wedding gift. The message was a name. The name belonged to a supplier Jun-ho's organization had trusted for 6 years. The supplier, it turned out, had been feeding shipment routes to a rival organization for the last 4 months. Maya was not supposed to know any of this. She learned it because she could not sleep, because the house was enormous and cold and smelled like a man's cologne she did not recognize, and because she had wandered down to what she assumed was a study only to find Jun-ho standing over a desk covered in shipping manifests, with his jacket discarded, and his sleeves rolled to the elbow, a scar catching the lamp light along his left forearm, thin and old, the kind of scar that did not come from an accident. "You should be asleep," he said without looking up. "I don't sleep well in new places." It was true. It was also not the reason she was standing in the doorway. He finally looked at her. There was something exhausted in his face that had not been there at the altar, something that made him look less like the man the whole city whispered about, and more like someone who had been carrying a weight so long he had forgotten what his shoulders felt like without it. "Go back to your room, Maya. Someone betrayed you tonight." She said it plainly, because plain was the only way she knew how to speak when she was frightened. The man who came to the reception. It wasn't a gift. It was a name.
Jun-ho ist Joe-Zeitend. Who told you that?
Nobody told me anything. I watched you leave the room. I watched the way your men moved. And I have been sitting in the hallway outside the study for the last 20 minutes listening to you make 4 phone calls, all of which involved the word supplier, and none of which involved the word gift. She adjusted her glasses. "I notice things. It's what I'm good at." For a long moment he said nothing. The room held a kind of silence that was not empty. It had weight to it, the specific pressure of a man reassessing a person he had already decided did not matter. "What else did you notice?" he said finally, and his voice had changed, had lost some of its flatness. She told him. Not because she wanted to be helpful, not yet, not exactly, but because the alternative was standing in a strange house feeling as invisible as she had felt her entire life, and for the first time in years, someone was actually listening to what came out of her mouth. She told him about the way the stranger's eyes had moved around the ballroom cataloging exits before he ever approached anyone. She told him that the 2 men who left with Jun-ho had not looked surprised, which meant they had suspected something before tonight. She told him, because she had overheard enough conversation drifting through the study door, that the supplier in question had raised his prices twice in the last quarter for no stated reason, which in her uncle's world of desperate men and bad math had always meant somebody was hedging against a fall. Jun-ho watched her the entire time she spoke. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, studying her the way he had studied her at the altar, except this time the flicker in his expression did not vanish. It stayed. "You should have been in a room like this a long time ago," he said. It was not flattery. It landed more like an accusation aimed at everyone who had ever overlooked her. "Nobody ever gave me a room like this," Maya said. He almost smiled. "Almost. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be worse than today." He was right. The next 11 days moved fast in the particular way danger moves when it has decided to stop being patient. The supplier who had been feeding information to the Choi family was found. Maya did not ask what happened to him, and Jun-ho did not offer to tell her, but she noticed the tightness that lived permanently now in the set of his shoulders, the way his men spoke to him in clipped urgent sentences that made the air in every room feel thinner. She was not meant to be involved in any of it. She understood that. She was a piece of paper, a debt settled, a wife in name only living in a house that did not feel like hers, in a marriage that existed on documents and nowhere else. But she kept noticing things, because noticing was the only power she had ever been permitted to hold, and one evening while organizing the chaos of Jun-ho's study into something resembling order, an act she undertook purely out of restlessness and the discomfort of sitting still, she found something in the supplier's old paperwork that made the floor of her understanding tilt sideways. The shipment routes that had been leaked were not random. They followed a pattern. And the pattern matched, almost exactly, a set of numbers she had seen scrawled in her uncle's handwriting on a notepad 3 months before her wedding was ever arranged. Her uncle was not a bystander in this. He was a second source. He had been selling information of his own, likely as a way to buy himself more time before his debts came due, and the timing of her marriage to Jun-ho had not simply been a coincidence of desperation. It had been a way to buy protection while continuing to sell secrets on the side. Maya sat with the notepad in her hands for nearly an hour before she made a decision that would change everything that came after it. She could have said nothing. She could have burned the notepad and let her uncle's betrayal die quietly, protected the only family she had left even though that family had sold her like inventory. It would have been easy. It would have been safe. Instead, she walked into Jun-ho's study, set the notepad on his desk, and told him what she had found. He read it twice. His face did not change, which frightened her more than any visible anger would have. When he finally looked up at her, his eyes had gone very still. "Your uncle," he said. "I know what this means for him." Her voice held steady even as her hands, folded in front of her, did not. "I'm telling you anyway." "Why?" "Because you deserve to know who's selling you out. Even if it costs me something." She held his gaze. "I didn't choose this marriage. But I'm not going to protect a man who used me as currency and then kept lying with the other hand." Something shifted in Jun-ho's face. It was the first time she had seen him look at her the way a person looks at someone they have decided to trust. "You understand what happens to men who do this," he said quietly. "I understand." She did not look away. He did not touch her that night. He did not thank her with words. But later, when she returned to her room, she found the door between their two adjoining spaces unlocked for the first time since the wedding, an invitation that asked nothing and offered everything, and she understood it as the strange, silent language he spoke instead of gratitude. Her uncle disappeared from the city 3 days later. Jun-ho never told her the details, and she never asked, though she noticed the way his men stopped mentioning Harold Whitfield's name entirely, the way a subject gets scrubbed from a room once it no longer needs discussing. She grieved it in private, in the particular quiet way a person grieves someone who was never good to her, but was still the only family she had. She did not regret what she'd done. That surprised her more than anything. The retaliation, when it came from the Choi family directly, and it came for her. It happened on a Tuesday, ordinary in every way until it wasn't. Maya had gone, against explicit instruction, to a small bookstore 3 blocks from the house because she had run out of things to read, and the walls of Jun-ho's world had started to feel like a cage dressed up as a mansion. She was standing in a narrow aisle with a paperback in her hand when a man stepped into the space behind her, too close, too deliberate, and said her name in a voice that did not belong to anyone she knew. "Mrs. Kong," he said, and the way he said it made her skin go cold. "You're a hard woman to get alone." She did not scream. She had spent a lifetime cultivating the specific skill of staying calm while everything around her fell apart, and she used it now, cataloging the exits the way she had once watched a stranger catalog them at her own wedding. There was a fire door 12 feet behind her. There was a metal bookend within reach on the shelf to her left, heavy enough to matter. "You have the wrong woman," she said, buying seconds. "I don't think I do." He reached for her arm. She swung the bookend into the side of his head before his fingers closed around her wrist, a short, brutal motion that came from nowhere she recognized inside herself, adrenaline moving her body faster than fear could stop it. He staggered back into a shelf, cursing, and she was already running for the fire door, already shoving it open into the alley beyond, already moving toward the street where people existed and witnesses existed, and a stranger could not simply disappear a woman in daylight. Jun-ho found her 4 minutes later, having been alerted by the store's silent alarm his security had quietly installed the week after the wedding without telling her, a fact she would be furious about later and grateful for in the moment. He arrived with 2 of his men and a stillness that had gone past anger into something colder. When he saw her standing in the alley, breathing hard, blood from a shallow cut on her hand where the bookend's edge had caught her skin, something in his face broke open for one unguarded second before he shut it down again. "You're hurt," he said. "I've fine." Her voice shook now that the danger had passed, now that her body had permission to feel what it had been too busy surviving to feel. "He knew my name. He called me Mrs. Kong." Jun-ho's jaw was a hard line. "You should never have left the house without." "I am not going to live in a house I cannot leave." She said it fast, before he could finish, before the fear could turn into something that made her small again. I didn't choose this marriage, but I'm not going to let it turn me into someone who's afraid of her own front door. He looked at her for a long moment. Something in his expression was working through something she couldn't fully read, some old calculation rearranging itself. The choice are targeting you specifically now. Not to get information. To get to me. I know. That changes things. I know that too. He reached out, slowly, and touched the shallow cut on her hand, his thumb passing lightly over the broken skin. It was the first time he had touched her voluntarily since the wedding. You fought him off, he said. It wasn't a question. There was something in his voice that had not been there before, something that sounded impossibly like pride. I had a bookend, and about 4 seconds. I used them. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, but close enough. Most people freeze. I've spent my whole life being underestimated. Her voice had gone quiet, honest in a way she hadn't planned. I stopped being surprised by what I can do when someone finally gives me a reason to. He did not respond to that with words. He simply nodded once, like he was recording the information somewhere permanent, and then he told his men to bring the car around, and the walk back to the vehicle happened in a silence that felt different than every other silence they had shared. It felt like something had shifted between them, and neither of them was ready yet to name it. That night, in the study, with her hand bandaged by nobody, because she had refused when he reached for the medical kit and insisted on doing it herself, they sat across from each other with a map of the city's shipping routes spread between them, and Jun-ho told her, for the first time, about the woman he had lost. Her name had been Yoon-seo. She had been engaged to him years before Maya had ever heard the Kong name whispered in a room. She had been killed in a targeted attack meant for him, caught in gunfire that had been aimed at his car, and had found her instead when she stepped out at the wrong moment. He did not tell the story with any drama. He told it in flat, careful sentences, like a man defusing something that could still, after all these years, explode in his hands if he was not precise. I told myself I would never let anyone close enough to be used against me again, he said, staring at the map without seeing it.
It was easier that way.
Nobody to lose. And now? Maya asked quietly. He looked up at her. Now the choice already know exactly how to hurt me. They found the weak point before I even admitted it existed. I'm not a weak point, she said. I'm the one who put my uncle's name on your desk. I'm the one who walked out of that bookstore on my own feet. I am not something for you to protect from a distance, Jun-ho. If I'm your wife, even on paper, then I'm part of this. Let me actually be part of it. He studied her for a long time, the lamplight carving shadows along the old scar on his forearm, and when he finally spoke his voice had dropped into something rougher than she had heard from him before. You're the first person in years who's made me feel like something other than a name on a ledger, he said. I told myself staying detached from you was survival. I think I was lying to myself. The air between them had gone thin and charged, the kind of silence that asked a question neither of them had the courage yet to answer out loud. Maya did not move. Neither did he. But something had been said that could not be unsaid, and both of them understood the shape of it even without a name attached. The Choi retaliation escalated 3 days later, and this time it was not subtle. They struck at a shipment transfer at the docks, a routine handoff that should have been quiet, and it turned into a firefight within 90 seconds of the first shot. Maya was not supposed to be anywhere near the docks that night. She had insisted on coming, had argued with Jun-ho for 20 minutes before he relented, because she had found a discrepancy in the transfer paperwork 3 hours earlier that suggested the handoff location had been compromised, and no one would listen to a warning delivered secondhand quickly enough to matter. She was right. The compromise was real. The choice were waiting. Gunfire cracked across the open concrete of the dock, sharp and close, and Jun-ho's body moved before his men's did, closing the distance to Maya in 2 strides and pulling her down behind a stacked wall of shipping containers, his arm braced across her back, his chest pressed to hers in the narrow space between steel. She could feel his heartbeat, fast and controlled, could feel the tension in every line of him as he angled his body to keep hers fully covered. Stay down, he said against her ear, voice low and urgent. Do not move. The exchange lasted less than 3 minutes, but stretched out in Maya's memory like something much longer. The world reduced to the smell of salt water and gun smoke and the specific warm weight of him shielding her, his breath against her temple, his hand flat and steady against her spine. When the gunfire finally stopped, when his men had cleared the last of the Choi shooters and the docks had gone eerily silent except for the distant slap of water against the hull of a ship, Jun-ho did not move away from her immediately. He stayed there, both of them breathing hard, close enough that she could see every detail of his face in the low dock lighting, the tension finally starting to bleed out of his jaw. "You could have died tonight," he said, and his voice had an edge to it she had never heard, something raw underneath the control. "So could you." She reached up, without entirely deciding to, and pressed her palm flat against his chest, feeling his heart still hammering beneath her hand. "I came because I found something in the paperwork. I was right. If I hadn't come, if I hadn't insisted, you wouldn't have known the location was compromised until it was too late." "That's not the point." "It is exactly the point." Her voice shook now, not from fear but from something fiercer. "I am not going to be the person standing behind glass while you handle everything alone. I never asked for this marriage, Jun-ho, but I am not going to spend it hiding from what it actually means." He looked at her for a long moment, and then he did something he had not done since the church, since the brush of his lips against her cheek, that had been nothing at all. He kissed her. Not carefully, not as a formality performed for witnesses. He kissed her like a man releasing something he had been holding for weeks, one hand sliding into her hair, careless of the pins that scattered against the concrete, the other arm still braced protectively around her back. Maya kissed him back with the same ferocity, for months of forced proximity and unspoken tension collapsing into a single moment neither of them tried to stop. When they finally broke apart, both breathing unevenly, he rested his forehead against hers for a moment, something almost vulnerable in the gesture. "I wasn't going to let this happen," he said quietly. "I told myself 100 times this marriage was paperwork." "It stopped being paperwork somewhere around the bookend," Maya said, and felt him almost laugh against her mouth. But the night was not finished delivering its costs. One of Jun-ho's men, a young enforcer named Taeyong who had guarded the study door faithfully since the wedding and had once quietly brought Maya tea without being asked, had taken a shot meant for Jun-ho during the initial exchange. He did not survive the drive back. Jun-ho said nothing when the car pulled into the garage, and the news was delivered in low, careful words by the man in the front seat. He simply stood very still for a long moment, jaw tight, eyes distant, and Maya understood without being told that this was the cost the danger mechanics of his world always demanded eventually. Nothing came free. Not information, not protection, not even a single stolen kiss on a dock at midnight. She did not offer empty comfort. She simply stood beside him in the garage, close enough that her shoulder brushed his arm, and let her presence say what words would only cheapen. The final confrontation came 5 days later, orchestrated not by Jun-ho's men but, in the end, by Maya herself. She had spent those 5 days doing the only thing she had ever been good at, disappearing into the details other people overlooked. She traced the paperwork trail from the compromised dock transfer back through 3 shell companies and found, buried in a set of falsified customs documents, the actual location where the head of the Choi operation was coordinating the assault on Kong territory, a warehouse 2 miles from the docks that was supposed to look abandoned and did not, upon close inspection of shipping records, look abandoned at all. She brought the information to Jun-ho at 2 in the morning, spreading the documents across his desk with hands that had stopped shaking days ago. "This is where he is," she said. "Sun Woo Choi. He's been running the operation from here the entire time, which means the attack on the docks wasn't retaliation.
It was a test.
He wanted to see how close he could get to you." Jun-ho studied the documents, then studied her, something calculating and impressed moving behind his eyes. "How did you find this?" "I told you. I notice things." She held his gaze steadily. "I want to be there when you end this." "Absolutely not. He tried to have me taken in a bookstore, Jun-ho. He nearly killed you at the docks. This is not a conversation where I stay home and wait for a phone call." Her voice did not waver. "I have spent my entire life being told to stay small, stay quiet, Stay out of the way, because I wasn't the kind of woman anyone thought was capable of anything. I am done proving that theory correct. He looked at her for a long, charged moment, and something in his face finally, fully surrendered. You stay behind me, he said. The entire time. Deal. The warehouse raid happened 2 nights later, executed with the precision Jun-ho brought to everything, his men moving through the dark in coordinated silence while Maya stayed close to his side exactly as promised, a small pistol she had insisted on learning to use over the last 5 days held steady in her hands. The confrontation with Sun Woo-choi was brief and brutal, conducted in the particular economical violence that was the only language men like Jun-ho and his rivals had ever truly spoken to each other. Maya did not close her eyes. She watched, and when one of Choi's remaining men broke from the fight and came at her from an angle Jun-ho's attention hadn't covered, she did not freeze the way the world had always assumed a woman like her would freeze. She raised the pistol, fired once, and put him on the ground before he closed half the distance between them. Jun-ho turned at the sound, saw her standing steady over the man she had stopped, saw the warehouse otherwise cleared and silent around them, and something in his expression shifted into an acknowledgement that went beyond gratitude, beyond even pride. It was the look of a man recognizing, fully and finally, that the woman standing in front of him was not a debt paid or a piece of paper signed. She was someone who had saved his empire as surely as he had once shielded her body from gunfire. Sun Woo-choi did not survive the confrontation. Neither did the threat he represented. In the weeks that followed, the Choi organization fractured without its head, and Jun-ho's territory, for the first time in months, went quiet in the particular way that meant safety rather than the eye of a storm. Maya stood in the study 3 weeks later. Papers from the settled conflict spread across the desk where wedding paperwork had once determined the entire shape of her life. Jun-ho came in behind her, closing the door, and for a moment neither of them spoke. My uncle used me to buy him self-protection, she said finally, not looking up from the desk. And, in the end, I was the one who ended up protecting your entire operation instead. You were never something to be used, Jun-ho said, coming to stand beside her. Not after that first night in this room. I think I knew that faster than I wanted to admit. She looked up at him. This marriage started as a transaction. I need you to say, honestly, what it is now. He reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, his hand lingering against her jaw in a way that was neither careful nor casual, but certain. It's the only thing in my life that was never a transaction. Everything else I have, I built or I took. You're the one thing I was given, and somehow you turned out to be the one thing worth keeping. That's not exactly romantic, Maya said, though her voice had gone soft. I don't know how to be romantic. I know how to be honest. His thumb traced her cheekbone. You are not the wife I was forced to accept, Maya. You are the reason I still have an empire to hand down to anyone at all. She did not answer with words. She reached up, pulled him down by the collar of his open shirt, and kissed him the way she had wanted to since the docks, without hesitation, without the fear that had shaped every choice available to her before she walked into this house. He kissed her back like a man who had spent years building walls specifically so no one could ever again take something from him that mattered, and had finally decided the risk was worth it. Later, standing at the window of the study overlooking the dark water beyond the estate, Maya thought about the girl who had walked down that church aisle 4 months earlier, invisible, underestimated, married off like a debt paid in a white dress that fit nothing about who she actually was. That girl had believed the wedding was the worst thing that would ever happen to her. She had been wrong. It had simply been the first page of a story nobody had bothered to ask if she wanted to write. She had written it anyway, in the details other people never noticed, in the choices that cost her everything and gave her back something she had never expected to have. A place. A partner who saw her clearly. A version of herself she had never been permitted to become in any room before this one. If this story pulled you in the way it pulled Maya into a life she never chose but ultimately claimed as her own, make sure you are subscribed for more, because there's so many more women like her waiting to be underestimated by the wrong man one more time before they prove exactly what they are capable of. Drop a comment telling me which moment hit you hardest. Hit that like button if you want more stories exactly like this one, and I will see you in the next story.